In this video, I'll share with you how to look at what are called supply and demand zones, or another way to look at it is buyer and seller zones. I think this is one of those things that I really wanted to put together here because I cover a lot of what are called value channels. This is something that I think works very well in any market, is trading off value channels. But the reason why they work is because they identify the places in a asset that you should be looking for supply and demand imbalances. And this gives you an opportunity to then really focus your attention on these areas to enter a trade, to enter a short sell, to enter a long position. That's really why I use value channels. That's why I think it's one of the most powerful technical analysis tools that you can use. It just seems to work, and mainly because it's using the historical data that's available to you for what you're trading. But I think one of the things that's missing on a lot of people that have adopted this style with me on this is that these lines aren't just simply lines. What they are is they're zones that then open up for you an area that you should be looking for an imbalance of supply and demand, or an imbalance of buyers and sellers. So that's what we'll cover in this video. Now what we're looking at here is we're looking at TRX BTC on Binance on a daily time frame. You'll see that I already have an horizontal value channel drawn. Now if you don't know what value channels are, I cover this in other videos here on YouTube, so just search for value channels on my channel. And in my training, I go into a lot more detail around what value channels are, how to draw them, how to trade around them. But I really wanted to expand here on YouTube, because I think this is a big missing point that I think a lot of people don't quite get of what you're doing with value channels and how it reveals the psychology of the marketplace for you. So the first thing is that we're looking at this on a daily time frame, and value channels highlight for you where you should be looking for imbalances of supply and demand. And they're zones. So this blue line that we see here, this whole blue line represents a supply and demand zone, or a buyer and seller zone. When price action gets to this range, you are looking for clues or indications through other indicators, through reading price action, reading volume, and everything else a lot of things that I cover here on the channel. You're looking for indication, typically at a lower time frame, that the supply has been met, or that the demand for this asset is falling off, or that there's buyers in the market, the buyers have ran out, the sellers are stepping up, or the sellers have ran out. I know that there's a lot of contrary information that I just covered there, but that's what you're looking for at these key ranges. This is why value channels are so powerful, because they show you the key points in an asset that you should be looking for these supply and demand zones. Another thing that I'll cover here, and you'll see at this supply and demand zone, obviously the sellers took control of the market. So there was plenty of supply and there was not enough demand for this asset. It's TRX. The other thing that I should mention here that you should see within your mind is that between each value channel line is another line and sublines. So here's between this blue line and this line here, there is a middle line. This is another supply and demand zone. You'll see where price actually started to touch it here, this day here. Let me get an arrow. So this day here, it started to touch it, and it was remember, these lines are not hard, fast lines, they're zones. And they're zones that alert you to be on the lookout for either a continuation of a trend or a rejection of a trend. But I like to call these supply and demand zones. They're basically, because that's what's happening in these zones. In these zones, the supply and demand of an asset is being discovered. This is, I guess I can't make it any more clear than just to walk through a couple more examples here. We see here this middle point of these two value channel lines this is another zone that we would be watching for. And in this zone, we see that the supply or the demand, there was no longer demand for this asset. And it did fall off pretty hard. Now, part of this is obviously a decline in Bitcoin as well, but it doesn't matter. This works in any market. These value channel lines hold up. And let's go through a couple more examples just so this is very clear. In this range here is another supply and demand zone. And we can see here for a little bit of time, this would have been a nice little, I'd say, swing trade for 15% or so. At some point in time, there was proof here that this supply and demand zone, there was not enough supply, and there was buyers interested in this asset. And it traded sideways, you could say consolidation, and eventually did have a little bit of run. Now, when it was retested again, it held up again here. And I know it's hard to see sometimes, so I'll scroll in. It held up again, and then it was broken through solidly. And this zone, when it was tested again, you'll see that it was rejected. Now, one thing, I say this often, it's so easy to go back in historical charts. I watch a lot of YouTube videos. I watch a lot of stuff, a lot of training. And I always try to stray away from trying to look at historical charts and trying to build an edge off that, because that is the past. And trying to fit these little models into things without making it relevant to what's happening with price action right now. So the following examples that I'll cover, we're just going to talk about price action right now, and I'll cover how you would look at these supply and demand zones. And I'm intentionally not going into a lot of detail and saying, well, what do you look for in these supply and demand zones? I have other videos that cover that. I cover that in detail in my training. That's where you are going to lower time frames. And let's do this. Let's actually go here right now. So TRX, if we draw another line here in the middle, and I do this in my mind, and you should be able to do these in your mind. When you have your core value channel lines, you should be able to then draw your middle lines. And even if you wanted to subdivide it up more, you should be able to draw those in your head, or at least see them in your head. But it does help when you go to lower time frames. So we know now that through using kind of the core value channels, this isn't quite the middle, that this would be the middle, that this range here is our supply and demand zone. So as it approaches this range here, and the size of this box doesn't matter, you just know that around this line there's a supply and demand zone. For each asset it's different. For each asset, if I were to get in the weeds here, I would say you would look at the average daily range, and then you would look and see at what is that average daily range move, and then that would tell you how much from this line that you should be looking at the supply and demand zone. But I don't want to get that into the weeds. Just understand that there's a little bit more that goes into this. So, and I do cover that in the training, but that's an additional aspect to how you get more granular with looking at supply and demand zones, is you understand that each asset is traded differently. But for right now, TRX has been rejected near a supply and demand zone. Part of this is that Bitcoin has declined a little bit. But what we're looking for at a lower time frame is rejection. So if we go to the 2 hour and we look at this, we're looking for, is there evidence that the buyers are interested in this asset at this price, or is there evidence that the sellers don't believe that this is going to be worth more and they should take some profits? Keep in mind there's many different market participants, so you're looking at this overall. But what's nice about value channels is that they give you these zones. Otherwise, let me make this point very clear. Here's why I like value channels above everything else. Simple technical analysis is a support and resistance. That's simple technical analysis. If you want to be a very basic trader, trade off support and resistance. A simple basic trader that trades off support and resistance has zero edge on the market. And I don't think I've ever shared this before. Support and resistance is good. It works until it doesn't. And then it doesn't work all the time because support only really holds up in a bull market and resistance doesn't in a bear market. When things are declining, neither support or resistance holds up. And in a bull market, sometimes resistance doesn't hold up at all. It's a hit or miss. Anything that the market uses, I like to use as well because other traders are looking at. But I will share this. The reason why I use value channels above support and resistance more is because support and resistance is a very simple non-edge trading technique that does not give me a big enough edge to pull capital from the market. If it did, then I would be talking a lot about support and resistance. But maybe on scalping I do, because it does matter at some lower time frames. But generally when I'm looking for a huge edge on the market, I'm trading off value channels. And I trade other markets, so across other markets. So this isn't just crypto. It works in other markets. So in these ranges, I'm looking for an imbalance of buyers and sellers. So there's another line here. And actually, if we draw another line here, and I know I'm going off in mini tangents here, but if we draw another line here, you'll see, and let me make this very clear. Let's scroll out. This is a main value channel line. This is a sub value channel line here. This line here that I just drew is another sub value channel line. So you're dividing your value channels into sub value channels, and you're doing this typically in your mind. But this is telling you key places that you should be looking for support and not support, supply and demand zones. So we're at a supply and demand zone right now. Right now, as we speak, we're at a supply and demand zone. So what are you looking for? This is the main point I want to hammer home here. You're looking for proof that either the buyers are satisfied or they're not satisfied, or the sellers are satisfied or they're not satisfied. You're looking for an imbalance of supply and demand. And the challenge is I can make this video an hour and a half long because all the other things that I cover a lot on this channel, but in my training, I dive into these things. I dive into how to look at the chart and how to understand stopping volume, other volume, and everything else. The key point, the key thing that I really want to get across here is that the value channel lines are not just lines. There are areas where you're looking for the market psychology to reveal itself to you. Or you're looking at the market and you're trying to understand the market from multiple angles and the psychology of multiple angles of buyers and sellers. You're getting in the mind of the market at these specific areas. Otherwise, your other option is, and this is, let's just go back, and I know I'm rehashing a lot of different stuff. Your other option is just to go back to support and resistance and say, well, when it breaks this point, then I should be looking at supply and demand. Or when it gets above this daily range, I should look at supply and demand. Or when it breaks this range here, I should look at supply and demand. I think you could probably devise a system around that. My biggest challenge to that is that it for me, when I've devised a system around it and I'm just sharing my bias, it doesn't give me a big enough edge. Value channels and what I'm explaining here and how I'm explaining looking at it is one of my edges on the market. Is understanding that when price hits these key ranges, these supply and demand zones, I'm looking for a couple different things, and I'm saying in my mind, obviously in the crypto market, for some exchanges, you can only go long. So really I'm saying, should I be long at this position? Should I stay out of the market? If I'm in a position, should I sell? If I could short, I would say, could I take a short position? But for a lot of exchanges that I trade on, I can't trade short. So at these key supply and demand zones, you're making decisions. You're making trading decisions. You're making an assessment on the market. You're making an assessment whether or not you should move up your stop loss, whether or not you should maybe add to a position. So I already added to TRX down here. This is a good example. Down here, I added a position at TRX because it was at the bottom of the value channel, was rejected. So I added to this position. Now on this retest of this supply and demand zone, I'm making a decision here. I'm making a decision from this position here. Let's take out the long tool. From this position here, I don't know the exact area, but let's just say from this position here, I'm up 5-6%. Do I exit this position, or do I potentially add to this position for an additional breakout move? Do I see strength? And because the value channels are an essential part of my trading system, I'm looking in the support and resistance zone, or I say support and resistance, supply and demand zone. I'm looking in the supply and demand zone. This is where I'm looking for. And right now, what I'm seeing, just based on the daily price action, seeing some heavy rejection, meaning that there is still buyers interested in this asset at this supply and demand zone. That could drastically change in a second. One of the interesting things that I see here is that potentially these sellers have actually ran out in this market. Based on the volume profile that I see here, if we actually do turn it on here. So it's kind of what I expected. So this volume right here, if this holds up, then this is a good sign that, to me, this value channel area, this supply and demand area, this buyer and seller area, there is still buyers stepping up in the market. And the sellers have not maintained control of this market. One thing I will say, this is going to run really contrary to a lot of maybe what you see, is that this can be broken. So this can be broken, and it doesn't have to hold up. I'm hesitating even mentioning this, but I'll keep it in the video. This supply and demand zone can be broken, but it has to be broken with the right profile of price action that shows that there's an imbalance between supply and demand for whatever reason. See, the markets are messy. That's the thing. The biggest thing. The markets are not like boxing. Boxing is a fight that has, you're only using your hands. You can't kick. The boxing is like a street fight. It's not even like MMA. The market is like a street fight. It's a really brutal street fight. So in boxing and even MMA, if we compare this to fighting, there's still rules in MMA. You're in a ring. There's a referee. Everything else. This is a street fight. So it's really messy. So while this tells you where to look, your rules can be broke in the real world of trading, where this supply and demand zone can be broken, but it can be broken on the way it can be broken is a breakdown of just the buyers aren't participating and the sellers just took over temporarily. But through reading price action and through reading volume and maybe using other indicators, you can suss that out and see that as an opportunity. I mentioned that just for completeness. I'm not mentioning that to confuse you. I like to always try to bring clarity. But I guess I got to be completely upfront. That's the challenge. I have to be completely upfront. The completely upfront thing is, yes, I'm looking for this line to hold up, but I might still enter a position long. I might still enter a long position here. And this is probably one of the frustrating things sometimes of when people see me trade, is that I still might enter a long position here if this breaks with a stop loss, because I see a pattern of price action that tells me that this supply and demand zone in this range was tested and it broke, but it broke on a pattern that reveals to me that the sellers have ran out. is probably the best way to look at that. Is probably the best way to explain it. I feel like I'm going on a tangent, and maybe I'll have to redo this video. If I kept this in, then obviously I didn't redo the video because I thought it might have some value or it would help some people. But I just mentioned that I mentioned that not to scare you and not to confuse you. I actually think it should help you. Why? Because the markets are messy. The markets aren't these beautiful support and resistance lines, these total moving averages. And I've got a video on moving averages that I'm just dying to do, but it's not these super, it's a street fight is the best way to say it. Let's jump over to another chart. So let's go to LSK ETH. Maybe that will help me get onto more clarity here. Actually, we're jumping into LSK BTC, and this is a good example. So I did share this in the Discord group that I entered a position here, my first position. It's at the bottom of a value channel, support and demand, not supply and demand zone, right here. And the interesting thing about what we see here, and this is actually another good example because this highlights the messy nature of the market, is these 4 days of gains. So let's go here and let's pull out this arrow. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. I mean, this is weak gains right here, but this is a decent day here for LSK. These 4 days of gains have been completely wiped out in this one day. On a day that other things are starting to advance, where Bitcoin has moved 9 to 10%. I don't know if it's still up 9 or 10%. Kind of surprised a lot of people. And it's declined. So you're probably wondering, this doesn't look like a good buy at all. Can it go lower? And yes, it can absolutely go lower. So I'm not saying that I have a bias towards being long here in this position. But I've been watching LSK for a while. I've been charting LSK. I've been looking for an opportunity to potentially enter a position on LSK to start scaling into this position for what I think could potentially be a retest to this mid-range here. So if we go here, this red line here is the mid-range, which from this move here would be about 132% profit. So I'll be watching this range as well as price moves, but I'm looking to scale into a position on LSK for a pretty decent size move. So my first question here, and this is where I test the market, is that I know that this is a supply and demand zone right here, and it's being retested again. And I maybe entered this position a little too early. I probably could have got a better price based on what we see here. I did. So I entered this position a little early, but I just nibbled my toe into the first position. So I've entered my first position. So this is what I'm looking for, and what I'm watching here is how much should I add? Because what I'm looking for and what I'm trying to understand from the market, and I'm bouncing to the 4-hour time frame here, is this supply and demand zone going to be held up? Not held up is the right way. Let's say, is enough buyers going to enter the market at this supply and demand zone? There's going to be buyers and sellers. There's always buyers and sellers. But is there enough buyers that are going long? Is there accumulation of smart money at this range is another thing I'm looking for. Is there accumulation at someone that has, like I do, on some trades? I don't always, I'm primarily a swing trader, but I do these longer term trades when I see the opportunity. I see the opportunity here, a longer term time frame. Let's look at the weekly chart. If you have larger capital to put into play in the market, you are trading sometimes off weekly or monthly charts. And if you look at this weekly chart, you see that price is starting to slow down. And you'll see that on some of these weeks, these moves, over 3 weeks, there's been a 180% move on some of these weeks. Now, of course, this is when the market was hot. But even here, on these kind of slower time frames, there's been a 30% move here. That's not much in the crypto market, obviously. But here is a 70% move. So if you're trading out these larger time frames like I am for this trade, my question right here is, in scaling into this position, and I know I'm getting into a lot more specifics here, but in scaling in this position, do I scale in at this supply and demand zone? Do I scale in at this supply and demand zone, right, which is the midpoint of this one? Do I scale in at this one, or do I not scale in at all? Because for whatever reason, there's just a breakdown of this asset and there's no value in this asset anymore. All of these things can go to zero. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is everything in crypto can go to zero. So what I'm really looking for is there continued interest by buyers? And just look at that volume profile scale down here. So you just see the volume completely. This is a sign. This is a prime sign. And I'll put a challenge, I guess, up to whoever's watching this video. Put in your calendar, I don't know, 2 months from now. 2 months from now, so whatever day you're watching this, if it's closer to the time that it was released, to actually look at LSK BTC. And my guess is it'll be closer to around this range here. It might even get to this range, my guess. That's what I'm trading off of. And I won't say my guess. I'm putting my capital at play underneath that scenario. That's what I'm doing. So I'm not just talking, but I'm actually putting my capital at play. Not even at play. I'm putting my capital in the market. I'm voting with my capital right now with LSK and other things. If you're in the Discord group, you know what I'm trading. But in LSK on this expectation. Now that could change. I could see it go up. Let's say it could go up 50% and might hit heavy resistance here, and I might take profit. 50% is a great trade. 30% is a great trade. 15% is a great trade. It's more capital than I started with. But I'm looking to scale into this position here. And my question at this point in time is, once again, I want to get back to the central point of this video. The central point of this video is that there's a supply and demand zone here that I'm looking to scale into this position. There's also a supply and demand zone if price does rise from this point here. There's another supply and demand zone here that I might scale into as well as price rises, if I'm right in this position. If it does break, well, I might be stopped out. So I might stop out and then wait for it to hit another major supply and demand zone here. I'm speaking specifically at a higher level, not getting into the nitty-gritty of this particular trade and how to look at this, because I could go on for literally an hour with just this trade, because there's a lot of other factors. I'm not just, the value channel just tells you that this is the range that you should be looking for, the supply and demand zone. So that's what I'm looking for. This is going to be contrary to so much. I like what I see in the volume. I've just learned this in the market and trading. I like when I see declining volume like this, and an exhaustion of an asset that I think still has potential. When I see an exhaustion in an asset that I think still has potential, then I look for signs of accumulation by someone that's smarter than me, that has more capital than me. That's what I look for. So there's a lot of little things in this video that I probably have to just go into deeper. I'm just going to release it just because I've spent, I don't know, a half hour on this video so far, so I don't want to redo it and try to give more clarity. I'm keeping this in intentionally because a lot of times what I do with these videos, just so you understand some of this, sometimes I scratch whole videos because I do go down these tangents, and I just feel that at some point in time, do I confuse you more, or is there enough value in there? And I redo it and usually redo it better. But I think I'll keep this one just because I think there's enough gems in here that if you listen to what I'm saying, you try to understand really what I'm saying without me going into a complete point-by-point breakdown of it. There's a lot of things in here that will give you an edge in the market. This is a prime example, once again. The contrary view of what you're seeing in volume here. Of course, I'm still looking for the things that I teach in my training because it's still critical, which is stopping volume At the 4-hour time frame, if we look for aspects of stopping volume, the volume profile, here's an interesting spike right here of volume in this range right here. So that does not match price action at all. So this here, this down bar, there something's odd with this down bar here. Either a lot of wash trading went on here because we weren't watching the market, or there's some accumulation that happened here, potentially. And then you're looking at follow-on volume. But even now I'm getting more into the weeds. The bottom line is we'll get back to the point. I took a position at the first supply and demand because I liked what I saw here in the price action. That was slowing down, starting to condense, and look like some accumulation in my experience. That's what I liked. So I entered my first position. My next position is either going to be, I'm either going to stop out of this position because it goes down, well, it goes past 5 to 7%, and I think there's still a downside here. Or my next position will be somewhere in this range here, where I feel that there's going to be a hold up of value in LSK. My next position might be above that as well. So it might be above that as well. I'm sharing this because where am I looking at these things? Let me bring this back, and just so I'm very clear. I'm looking once again at these core value channel lines. I just drew another subline there. So I'm looking here. That's where I'll be looking. This is the point. And then I'm going to end the video here because I just know that I'm already going to go on multiple tangents. These value channel lines, when you're looking at a chart, let's go to the daily view. You can look at support and resistance. I already covered that. But you need to know where to look at the chart. And you need to know what other people are looking at the chart. And you need a way to condense all that information. There's so much information on a chart, especially when you add other indicators. You add other things. There's so much information. So what are you trying to do to build your system, to build your trading system? You're building a trading system that gives you an edge, that tells you where to look and when to look. Where and when to look. Value channels, and what I'm explaining here, the supply and demand zones, are where and when to look. And then you're using the other skills that you've developed to read the psychology of the market, to see whether or not this is a risk-reward trade that you should do. At least a 1R, I say 2 to 5 to 6R trade is what you should be looking at. You'll see that this trade here, if I stick to my 5% stop loss, let's just say, and it works in my favor. So we'll just say I could even do a 10% stop loss. And the risk reward, we stick to this. It's a pretty big risk reward, pretty good risk reward, you would say. Now, I would scale into this position, but I plan to scale into this position all the way up to here. In this range, I plan to scale into this position. And then I'm looking for an exit in this range. So once again, I'll end the video with this. I don't think I finished the calendar bit. You can put in your calendar in 2 months. If you have a phone, obviously most people have a smartphone, put it in your calendar, check so-and-so's video, or check LSK BTC. And you can send me a message on Discord and see if I'm right or wrong, or see what I decided. But that's my anticipation for this trade, is that 1 or 2 month range. I think a lot is going to happen in the crypto market between that range, but I think that that's a good range for this asset, this trade. When I analyzed this trade and I looked at what am I looking to do in this trade, let me take a further step back just so that I give total clarity before I end the video. I identified that LSK was at the bottom of a value channel. One of the value channels here, not the overall value channel, but one of the value channels here. So this is an indication for me to start paying attention. Identified that potentially I saw the ability that smart capital, larger capital, bigger players in the market would be looking for accumulation in these ranges. So then I'm looking at the market and saying I want to join them. and I'm looking at the market from that perspective, and where would I enter, or where would I exit, I should say. So where would I exit? And that's where I'm looking at these supply and demand ranges. So let's say that this position does go in my favor. At every one of these supply and demand, major supply and demand zones, I'll be making an assessment. And it might be a quick assessment. It might be, say, move up my stop loss. It might be take some profit. It might be, actually, I see strength here. And I might even, this is one thing, I might even just check the news real quick and just see what's the sentiment. I do that every now and then, but usually I'm just trading off the chart. But sometimes I do that just to see if I see strength in something that really pops. Sometimes I do see what is the sentiment and what's the expectation there. But I don't do that a lot. A lot of times I'm just looking at these key supply and demand zones, and I'm trading off that. So that's the full picture. I do hope, once again, one thing that's great about YouTube is that if I completely confused you, you can leave a comment down below and say you completely confused me. This doesn't make sense. So definitely share some feedback. But if you have any questions or something's not clear, or maybe I need to expand on something, I can definitely do that. Just leave a comment down below. You also find links down below to the Discord group. So I share all my trades. I share my thoughts on the crypto market, what's happening, Bitcoin updates, and everything else. And I share some tools that I use down below as well. And that's all. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.